showtime. 1 minute until showtime. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everybody. You're listening to Yaron Brook's show. Today's news briefing. I think this is episode 8 today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting the show. Let's see. We're going to go through a bunch of stuff fairly quickly, I think, here. Hopefully quickly. We'll see. Of course, you can also call in 347-324-3075. I'll take all the calls at the end after I've gone over at least some of these news stories. I want to start off with a positive news story. Now, it's rare that I use the death of somebody as a positive news story, but in this case, celebrate away. Cardinal Law. Cardinal Law, the Roman Catholic cardinal, is dead. Good riddance to the world. Cardinal Law is the cardinal that protected and really hid the whole phenomena of child abuse, of the sexual molestation of children by Catholic priests. He basically would shuffle priests from parish to parish so that when he heard complaints about it, in an attempt to hide the phenomena, papers that were released by the Boston Globe, you can see this dramatization of the whole story breaking in a movie called Spotlight, an excellent movie from a couple of years ago, that describes the heroic work of the journalists who broke this case. But this is a cardinal who obviously knew. I mean, there were documents released afterwards showing that he knew what was going on, that he ignored it. Worse than ignored it. He kept the priests around children. He just moved them to places where people weren't complaining yet. It was leaked to him that he was going to be served with a subpoena to come to testify in front of a grand jury. He conveniently made a trip to Rome and never returned. Now, what's really horrific about the story, I mean, everything about the story is horrific, but is the fact that in Rome, he was basically treated with huge amount of honor and respect. Pope John Paul II, whom, I know a lot of libertarians and others who think he was such a great pope. This was the Polish pope. Everybody admires him and respects him. He gave a Cardinal Law promotion in 2004. As all this news was breaking, as documents were released to show that he knew what was going on. And he got promoted. He got promoted to Archpriest of the Basilica of St. Mary Major. He lived in a glorious, Italian villa in Rome. He was catered to. He lived, not a life of poverty and humility. And now it turns out, to continue the insult, that he is going to be offered a big funeral. A funeral in which he will be, treated like a cardinal, like the important cardinal that he was. The Pope himself will honor him during the ceremony with a blessing. I mean, if God exists, if God exists and is worth anything, this guy would go to the worst part of hell. I mean, he is lucky there is no God. There is no settling scores after one is dead. Now, I believe that he lived a psychologically horrible life in this world. But he should have lived that horrible life in this world in a jail cell. Knowing about sexual abuse of children and not reporting it, actually hiding it, is a crime, or should be a crime if it's not. I mean, it is just horrific. The whole behavior of the Catholic Church, how anybody can continue to be a Catholic, given I mean, beyond everything else that's wrong with Catholicism and with the Church over the last 2,000 years, the sexual abuse, sexual abuse that's been revealed over the last, if that doesn't dissuade you from at least switching churches and becoming something else, I have no idea what will. And I know we've got at least one person in Poland listening to this, a very Catholic country, and of course all over Latin America, it's Catholic. You're insane. It's not an accident that these priests did what they did. Psychologically, if you force them, you force them to be chaste. Psychologically, if you condemn sex the way you do, it has to have horrific psychological consequences. And some of those horrific psychological consequences come out, express themselves in, this horrific behavior towards children. So I don't know. The worst rung of hell, and I wish that hell had been inflicted on him in this life, is for sex abusers and those who protect them and those who shield them, and those who stay silent in the face of such evil towards innocent children. I mean, it's just. Anyway, he's dead. Good riddance. Now there's, and one of the good things to come out of his death is the fact that people are talking about it. It's making a lot of the front pages of the newspapers. Victims organizations are rallying against the Vatican and the way they're treating him as a hero. But this should tell you a lot about the Vatican, a lot about religion, a lot about the cultish nature, particularly of the Roman Catholic religion. It really behaves like a cult, a mindless cult in which the leadership group exploits everybody else and gets away basically with murder, with no consequences. All right, enough of that. Okay, so from one evil to another, there's this horrible Wall Street Journal article out today about Venezuela. And, we talked a lot about Venezuela, about how socialism has destroyed this country that used to be wealthy, this country that sits on the largest oil reserves in the world. And this country now has more homicides per capita than I think any other country in the world, maybe with the exception of San Salvador. But what is not being captured and what is coming out leaking right now is the extent to which the police and the military, in the name of combating violence, is slaughtering people, torturing people, committing mass murder, just going into places and just killing people in large groups, taking them out into the woods and burying people alive, and they, smashing their heads in. The story in the Wall Street Journal is just horrific. And it shows you exactly what happens. One of the things that's interesting is that the support for Chavez and the support for Maduro has always been in the poorest barrios and the poorest neighborhoods of Venezuela, where the poorest people have lived, and where there's always been a lot of frustration. That frustration is somewhat legitimate. It's not like Venezuela used to be a capitalist country. Venezuela used to be some cross between a semi-free and feudal country where the rich in this case, because they controlled the political establishment, were really exploiting the poor. So there was no real free market where the poor could rise up. And this is, of course, where the mixed economy ultimately leads us. So in such an environment, poor people are frustrated. There is no ability for them to advance in life because they are held in place by the cronyism, by the feudalism that is inherent in the system. And socialism seems to appeal to them. Of course, little do they know, they are relatively ignorant. It's not them that I blame for socialism. Little do they know that they will become the victims of socialism. So, of course, they are the ones today in Venezuela starving. They're the ones in Venezuela who cannot feed their kids. They're the ones in Venezuela have no jobs now because of socialism. And now they're the ones who are being beaten and murdered and you know, in the most ugly ways possible by the regime that they overwhelmingly voted for. So, you know, what you're getting is poor people suffer no matter what. And that, you know, one of the great tragedies is, of course, is that all over Latin America, this is the case, and all over the world, really, that poor people are the victims of all the different political economic systems that are being tried today. And the one political economic system that actually helps the poor, that actually allows ambitious poor people that actually work and ambitious and are driven and actually want to improve their life, the only economic system that makes that possible, which is capitalism, that they don't get. And again, the proof of that is in places that adopt elements of capitalism, even a little bit of it, and get rid of the feudalism and the socialism, are the ones in which poor people do relatively well. And again, look at China, look at India, look at most of Southeast Asia, look at the Asian tigers. It's striking how the world has these examples. And yesterday we talked about Chile, which saw a number of poor people drop from 68% of the population to 11% of the population in a matter of, 1990 to 2014. So in a matter of 24 years, because of the adoption of pro-market policies. And yet, everybody ignores this. And here is more killing in the name of socialism, killing by a socialist regime. And one of the astounding things going on is, where's the outcry? Where are all the Catholic, what did they call it? What is the name? Maybe somebody in the chat could tell me. What is the name of that Catholic theology that is very socialist and is very, very popular in Latin America? You know, I used to teach at Jesuit school, Santa Clara University, and the priests there were all adherents to the socialist version of Catholicism. Indeed, the Pope, the current Pope, the Pope that is going to honor Cardinal Law with a blessing, is a progressive. He's one. Liberation theology. Thank you, Emiliano. Liberation theology, right? Where are all the liberation theology Catholics? Where condemning the regime in Venezuela, condemning the socialism that made the regime in Venezuela possible. And by the way, I was listening to NPR while driving today, and one of the things that the NPR correspondents are struggling with, they're really having a hard time, is they keep saying, oh, this Pope, he's such a progressive, and yet, how can he honor Cardinal Law? I mean, he's so good on all these economic issues, on inequality, on all these other issues, but how can he honor Cardinal Law? And they just, you know, bewildered by how they get that, you know, what Cardinal Law did is evil, and they can't integrate with a Pope that they view as a hero because he's so-called progressive. Where are all the celebrities? Where are all the Hollywood celebrities? Where are all our politicians going after Venezuela for what is going on there, for the murder? Imagine, just, and this is, you know, truly, Imagine if this was a right-wing kind of kind of fascist regime doing this. Now, I'm not trying to say that's a good regime, but no. Imagine if they were doing this, and we know this from Chile, from Pinochet, when he killed people, tortured people, people disappeared. The whole world was on top of him. But when a socialist does this, they get a free pass. They get a free pass. And this is the evil of altruism in action. This is the perception that socialism, it's done in a good cause. Because some people just have to sacrifice, but it's done in a good cause. The cause is equality. Yeah, Maduro is a bad guy. So in this case, it's no good. But the cause, the socialism in and of itself, that's good because the purpose is a good purpose. The purpose is equality. The purpose is altruism. It's sacrifice for the poor. And they can't condemn socialism as a consequence. Every time socialism goes away, becomes murderous, which it always does. They make excuses. They invent stuff. They just don't look. They pretend not to see. They just evade it completely. Where are the people who were thrilled with Chavez and Maduro just a few years ago? And now, when people are being slaughtered, silent. Nothing, because God forbid they should criticize a socialist. A socialist. I mean, it's good that we condemn the fascist. It's great that we condemn the fascist. And now we need to do the same with the socialist. It's like I think I've told you the story before. I once was in the green room at the John Stossel show, and a guy walked in, and everybody said, "Oh, he's a communist." And I said, "No, he can't be really a communist." They said, No, he's really a communist." And I was like outraged, and I said, "How can you be nice to him? How can you treat him? The guy's evil. This is an evil ideology." And they were all libertarians, so they were like, "Oh no, we don't. You can't judge. You can't do this." Now, if somebody walked in there and said, "I'm a Nazi," even the libertarians would have condemned him. Everybody would have condemned him, right? He wouldn't have said he's a Nazi because he would have been so afraid of the condemnation of everybody around him. And yet a communist gets a free pass, a completely free pass in our culture. And the socialists get to kill people left and right in our culture. Maybe that's changing in the sense that now the fascists and the Nazis and the white supremacists get somewhat of a free pass by some people. Maybe we're getting equal treatment of monsters by many in our culture. Another sign of the real deterioration. By the way, we're getting a lot of information about what's going on in Venezuela from the former Justice Minister, who it's hard to understand a woman like this, right? She was a socialist, part of the Socialist Party. She served under Chavez and Maduro, and then she suddenly decided it was going too far, and she was fired, and she escaped because she thought she was going to be arrested and jailed, and she escaped, and now she's leaking documents showing what this regime has been doing and the extent to which it has been murdering people, the what they call extrajudicial killings without a trial. The numbers are just astounding. Close to 2,000 people in 16. Nobody really knows what the numbers are for this year yet. But it's a police state that is victimizing everybody. And since it's victimized the middle class, it's destroyed the middle class. It's destroyed and completely destroyed the business class, the wealthy class. Now it's devouring its own. It's devouring its own supporters. It's devouring the poor, and it's killing them. This is what socialism is really about. All right. Let's see. What do we want to do now? All right, let's just talk about, a little bit of domestic stuff. Cronyism. Let's talk about cronyism for a minute. This was supposed to be the regime. This was supposed to be, call it a regime. This was supposed to be the administration, the Trump administration. This was supposed to be the administration that drained the swamp. And I think all Americans considered part of the swamp the whole idea of cronyism, a business in bed with government, and everything that represents. That to me, and I think to many Americans, represents the real swamp. And yet this administration, time and time, is proving again and again and again that it is just a part of the swamp, that it is a major part of the swamp, that it supports the swamp, that it actually is a swamp enhancer. One example of this is the new tariffs on Bombardier. They were passed. They were officially passed now, so they're officially part of the law. They were just proposed a few days ago when I talked about it. So now Bombardier there's a tariff on Bombardier jets coming into the United States. Who asked for this? Where did this come from? This was asked for by Boeing. Boeing, probably one of the most crony companies in America today, got its way. They got the 300%. But then I read this other story, the way Boeing also features prominently. It turns out that the Trump administration has nominated 3 people to the Export-Import Bank. Now, you'd think that if the Trump administration was about draining the swamp, the first thing that would go, even though it's small and it's not that significant financially, it's just symbolic, that the Export-Import Bank, which basically subsidizes American businesses, big American businesses like, drum roll please, Boeing and General Electric, the 2 biggest crony companies in America, that would go, that would be eliminated. No, instead, they're nominating people to serve on the board because they intend to continue this. Trump has expressed his support for the Export-Import Bank. There was a period in which the Republicans took away funding from the Export-Import Bank, and then this is under Obama, and they got away with it. And then a few months later, they retracted it, and they reestablished funding for it. I mean, this is the Republican Party that is completely crony, completely sold out, and the Export-Import Bank is a great symbol of that. Again, people complain, oh, but Bombardier gets subsidies, and we need to combat those subsidies by putting a tariff on them. And what does the Import-Export Bank do to Boeing? And the million other ways in which Boeing gets subsidies. I mean, you'd think that America was a laissez-faire country, and those awful mixed economies in China and in Canada that are giving their companies subsidies. Oh my God, how evil could that be? As we pass the farm subsidy bill, as we pass a tax bill filled with subsidies to all kinds of favored industries. And of course the Trump supporters, no. I mean, he's the greatest. I just saw somebody posted here, the greatest president since George Washington. And yesterday, I loved it. Yesterday, a known Trump supporter, I said something negative about Trump, and I gave evidence, and I gave and he wrote, no, Trump's great, and then I gave the evidence. He said, no, Trump's great. Like, and this is what I've said from the beginning. What really is scary about Trump is not Trump, it's his supporters who don't think, who are just, Trump's great, Trump's great, Trump's great. I'm a monotone. Now, I can understand somebody having a reasoned argument for Trump. I don't think that's nuts. I don't think that the position, the anti-Trump position, is an obvious 100% slam dunk. That I think there's a lot of confusion, particularly given the alternative. But what scares me is the percentage of Americans who are, it doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what arguments you give. It doesn't matter what you talk about. It doesn't matter whether they believe in free trade or not. Trump is great. No matter what you say, Trump is great. All right. So cronyism, alive and well. The swamp, alive, well, thriving, with lots and lots and lots of swamp animals, being fed well. Our political class and our lobbyists and our cronies, they're all doing quite well in Washington these days. Nobody's feeling the pinch because of Donald Trump being in the White House. The people who are feeling the pinch are the people probably who shouldn't be. All right, a few other things. Let's see. Let me do this one quickly. The United Nations is going to meet tomorrow to condemn the General Assembly, to condemn the United States for moving the embassy, for declaring that the embassy will move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And everybody's like really upset. This is the United Nations. Trump is threatening that anybody who votes against the United States, we're going to sanction them, which is just bizarre. Israel is lobbying all these countries. As if Israel has any lobbying power. Israel's lobbying all these companies not to vote against, but clearly the United Nations will tomorrow condemn the United States for moving the embassy. There are no riots, by the way, in the Middle East. There's no streams of blood, as some predicted that this announcement would create. There's no great anguish, but this is a big opportunity for the world to express how much it loves the Palestinians and hates Israel. And never, never, never did the politicians of the world and the political movements of the world miss an opportunity to express that obvious, that altruistic support the downtrodden, i.e. the Palestinians, and come down on the strong and the virtuous, the Israelis. And again, not everything Israel does is virtuous, but relatively speaking, oh my God. This is what the United States should do. It should be very simple, very simple. And I think it should do this whether the United Nations votes one way or the other. It doesn't really matter. The United States should say unequivocally that it doesn't care what the United Nations votes. It should say unequivocally that the United Nations has no business in setting policy for the United States. It should immediately withdraw all funding from the United Nations. It should withdraw, what's her name, former governor of South Carolina, from Nikki Haley, from the United Nations, and give them notice that they should move the headquarters of the United Nations from New York City, with a strong recommendation that it should be facilitated in Caracas, Venezuela, the ideal location, I think, for the United Nations, one of the most immoral institutions created. It competes. I don't know. No, the Catholic Church is more evil, I think, than the United Nations. But it's not an issue of being a dinosaur. It is immoral. It was immoral on the day it was founded. In some ways, it was more immoral the day it was founded than it is today, because the day it was founded placed Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union on equal footing with the United Nations. I can't think of anything with the United States. I can't think of a more evil idea than something like that. Of course, today it continues that tradition by including countries like Venezuela, probably, on the Human Rights Commission, or Syria or Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Commission. All right, enough UN. I've talked about that in the past, but I just find it entertaining that, it's America first, right? An America first foreign policy. Let's have an America first foreign policy, you Trump followers out there. I want an America first. Get the hell out of the United Nations. Stop funding it. Don't give it any moral sanction. It is an illegitimate organization, and the United States government should declare it as such and act accordingly. That would be an America first strategy. What Trump is following, like all his predecessors, is an America sacrifice policy. Let's sacrifice Americans for the sake of. All right. Okay, so that was that. I wanted to talk about quickly that. And yeah, so I'm at my yeah. Okay, I'll end with that. Let's do this. So just a quick story. Because it's about the news. So I'm reading the news. I like to look at Google News. I look at headlines. I just scan the headlines, looking at what's going on. And this is the story. This is a Wall Street Journal story. So this is not some rag thing. And it says, drug and alcohol deaths at U.S. workplaces soar. Deaths jumped more than 30% in 2016 as the struggle with the deadly opioid epidemic migrates to the workplace. And I'm thinking, wow. I mean, I know this opioid thing is bad, and it's really horrible. And wow, it's soared by 30%. And something must be. This is really horrible, right? And then I start reading the article, and it turns out that 217 workers died last year from an unintentional overdose. 217, right? Soared 30% increase. You'd think there was some epidemic. You'd think that hundreds, that thousands of people were dying, that this was some massive, awful thing. Okay, 217, 30%, is that not huge of a number? I mean, it's sad when people die. It just seems like the headline and the story are just on different planets. I mean, 217 people probably die every year of the many, 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 many things that are unreported in the newspaper that 217 people die of. Probably 217 people fall from roofs in the United States and die, and lots of other things. So, I mean, yeah, I get it. This is part of this whole issue of the deadly opioid epidemic, but it shows a little bit of the hysteria around these things when you take a small number like that and suddenly turn it into a big issue. All right. Lastly, so I'm getting my hair cut today. I don't know if you can see, but shorter hair, and it was blow dry. You got to blow dry today, so which I never do. I'm getting my hair cut today, and we're talking a little bit about tax cuts, and my hairdresser's all depressed because nobody's getting a tax cut, and it's all going to the rich, and she's not going to get anything, and nobody she knows is going to get anything, and people are moving out of California because of this tax cut, not because taxes in California are high. And then I started noticing in the papers a lot of stories about the fact that people don't know they're getting a tax cut. People are convinced that the tax cut is somehow going to go to somebody else. And it turns out over 80% of people will probably see a tax cut. Now, that's not true in California. In California, it'll be less than 80%. But the people who won't get a tax cut in California are the upper middle class. They're the people who have $1 million homes and now can't deduct the mortgage. It's the people who have, large property taxes and other taxes that can't deduct them anymore. They're the ones who are going to be hurt by this tax bill. It's not going to be people at the bottom. It's not going to be people at the top. Both at the top and at the bottom, people are actually going to get to keep more of their money. But it strikes me that the amount of misinformation, the amount of ignorance, the amount of stuff that people don't know. And then, of course, nobody knows, and this is true of The Economist, I see in the Wall Street Journal and everywhere, nobody understands the real impact of corporate tax cuts, which is to raise wages and to lower the price of goods. And it's astounding, the economic ignorance of economists when it comes to this kind of stuff. And, and you add all this up and you just see, oh my God, like 99% of the people are just either stupid or ignorant of economics. They have no idea, and they can't think in those terms. They can't think about how this works and why it works and what competition does and how it drives down profit, and therefore there's no way that the corporations can actually keep these new profits that are so-called going to be there. They're going to have to either raise wages or put it into lower prices, or if competition demands it, invest it. But they're not going to. The money's not just going to sit there, and the profit margins long term can't sustain a artificial increase. They will be driven down through competition. That's how competition works. It always drives profit margins down. It drives them to the cost of capital, and the cost of capital is lower than. Anyway, it's ridiculous, the amount of ignorance. Even the president and even people around the president, they were all saying stupid things about the corporate tax cuts. So it's not surprising that ordinary Americans have no clue, really have no clue, because the Republicans don't explain the tax cuts, don't explain how they benefit you. They're apologizing half the time for doing it. There's no moral, you know, if I was to explain the tax cut, I would start with the fact that any money you produce, any money you own is yours. And that the federal government, we're in a situation where the federal government has commitments. It's spending all this stuff. And by the way, you voted for all these commitments. So we're going to have to take a certain percentage from you. What we'd like to do is take the smallest percentage possible from you because it's yours. It's not ours. And then I think people would kind of get it. But that's not what's described to them. It's not what they told to them, not by Republicans and not by Democrats, not by anybody. And then how exactly the taxes are structured, of course, Republicans have made it just as complex, just as opaque, just as difficult to understand, just as disguising all the goodies that they're giving to all the special, the pressure groups, as Democrats do. There's no difference. Yes, most Americans will get some of their money back. Good. They'll have to pay it all back, by the way, all of it, plus interest, or any tax cut you get today. With interest, you're going to have to pay. Why, you say? Because the debt has to be paid back somehow. You know, we're not cutting spending, God forbid. Republicans don't believe in cutting spending. They never cut spending. Democrats don't believe in cutting spending. They never cut spending. So who's going to cut spending? There's nobody to cut spending. Deficits are only increasing. Who's going to pay for the debt? You will. I will. My kids will. My grandkids will. But I will. In the future. With interest. Because the debt you have to pay interest on the debt. So it's going to grow. So your debts are going to grow. My debts are going to grow. I mean, this tax cut, at the end of the day, is... I wish I was better with words. It's a bribe. It's a bribe to keep you quiet. It's a bribe to make you a little happy. Now, it's unpopular, so the bribe's not really working, but it's a bribe. They know that it has to be reversed at some point. They know they're not going to cut spending. They're kind of praying, as Republicans do, that economic growth will accelerate dramatically as a consequence of this, and therefore, reduce the debt that way. Yeah, good luck. And if it did increase, they would spend it all. They would just increase spending even faster. I mean, this tax cut at the end of the day is, there's some benefit to the corporate side, but the personal side is meaningless. Meaningless. You'll get a few dollars more in your pocket, but hold on to them because those dollars are going to disappear. They're going to disappear in higher taxes in the future, slower economic growth in the future, inflation in the future. Those dollars will disappear. So don't be too happy about this tax cut. It ain't real. Until they cut spending, no tax cut is real. And you gotta have some more fervor around this. And the Republicans have none, zero, because they are basically Democrats on economic issues. The Democrats light in many respects. They're worse than Democrats, and they pretend they have a solution. Every Republican administration, almost everyone in history, has capped taxes. What's the big deal? The real big deal is cutting spending, which Republicans cannot do. All right. We have a little bit of time to take a couple of callers. So if you dialed in, if you press 1, I will take your question. You have to press 1 after you hear the show on your telephone. I'll give you a couple of seconds to press that magic number 1. And if you don't, I'm going to assume there are no questions, and I'm going to take the show off the air. So I assume that one of you called from overseas and one of you is calling for a 513 number are not calling to ask a question. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. We will reconvene, I think, tomorrow at the same time, same place. I will I do want to let you know that I think if I have enough time tomorrow to prepare, if not, it'll have to be next week. I do plan on doing a whole show on Donald Trump's new foreign policy strategy document that came out 2 days ago. I know nobody knows about this and nobody reads it, but he actually put out a whole big strategy document. I used to read those in the 2000s when George Bush used to put them out, and I'm curious to read Trump's one, and I plan to do that in the next couple of days. So either on tomorrow's show or otherwise sometime next week, we will do a whole show just dedicated to my analysis of that document, his planning document for the future foreign policy of the United States. All right, thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. We will see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. Bye.